Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this program, Merging Flavors, a Novel Idea Cooking Workshop with Chef Rose Archer. I'm Laurel Westendorf. I'm part of the Community Relations team at the Deschutes Public Library, and this month we are celebrating our community reading program, A Novel Idea, in its 18th year. This year's book is The Other Americans by Laila Lalami. And food plays an important part of cultural identity and offers a welcome sense of the home country for many of the characters in the novel. And we'll explore that through the recipes that Chef has put together today. This event was made possible by our sponsors and by your support, so thank you, and thank you for joining us. Leading us in the kitchen today is Chef Rose Archer. She has been a chef for over 25 years. Her career has taken her into some of the best kitchens in the world, including Spago's in Beverly Hills and Osteria Francescana. Her passion for healthy living inspired her to launch an online cooking program called True You Food, where students learn to cook whole real foods through a 10-module video series. Chef, thank you for putting together these recipes. I asked Rose to put together, one recipe. She put together 3. And I was really happy because it really captured the merging cultures of the book. And that's why it's titled as such, Merging Flavors. So thank you, Rose, and take it away.
Thanks, everyone, for being here live today. It's so fun to teach to real people. Even if it is through a screen. So I was so honored to be asked to teach a class on this. I'm pretty passionate about rights of all humans, and I think this book was just an amazing choice for the times that we're all living in right now. And I purposely chose 2 recipes. One is Moroccan and one is Mexican, but I chose recipes that actually have some similar ingredients, which I was really excited about showing that even though we have 2 countries that are so far away, that there's actually similarities between there's more similarities between us than differences, and you can see that in these traditional recipes from these 2 very far apart countries. So I'll point those out as I'm working with them. So the first thing I'm going to make is the Moroccan stuffed peppers, and this dish is traditionally made with ground lamb, which is just a little bit harder to come by in America and not quite as popular as ground beef, and so it's often substituted for ground beef here in America. So we're going to do that right now. The first thing you need to do is to get your peppers in the oven to roast just a little bit before we add the filling in. And so I've begun that now. And I so wish we had a camera that we could go straight down onto my cutting board so that you could really see everything. So I'm going to do a lot of lifting up and showing. So these are some peppers that I already started preparing. And they're cut in half and they have the inner membranes cut out of them. So I'm going to do that one now so you can see how I did that. So you just start with a whole pepper like this. And then you just take a knife. You slice it in half like this, just easy peasy. And then I take a small paring knife and I begin trimming just the inside. I like to leave the stem on because I think it looks really pretty in the final dish, but you don't obviously eat it. So if you end up cutting out your stem, it's totally fine too. It's just an aesthetic thing. So I just trim right down the side there and then around the inside, and then I'm able to use my hand and just break the whole inside out, and then it becomes a hollow cavity shell that we can stuff. So I'll do the other one really quick. Don't fall down. There we go, and I'm going to pop those insides out right there. And then I've got the other one. And then I'm going to add just a little tiny drizzle of olive oil. Where did they go? Here we go. And some salt. And this just helps them when they're cooking to not dry out and add some flavor. This inside too, and then I just give them a little rub to get that olive oil drizzle all over them. And then you're going to put these in the oven while you make the filling.
Now, Rose, I had a question about a vegetarian substitute for lamb. And someone suggested Beyond Meat Burger and Impossible Burger. Do you have another suggestion?
So I often substitute with just things like tofu, because when you have so many flavors going into the dish, getting a super dry, extra dry tofu, it often comes kind of in a cryovac package versus the water, the ones that come soaked in water. And so I just would saute all of the filling ingredients and then crumble that super firm tofu in and just let all the flavors that are in the filling soak into that. And I think that would be an awesome substitute. Another substitute would just be to up the grain like quinoa or something like that and just have a spiced grain filling as opposed to even a protein in it as well would also work. But that's a great question. Okay, so these are ready to go in the oven. I'm going to stick them in while we make the filling. All right. Over there. So to make the filling, I have a little small burner here so that my back isn't to everyone, and so I can face you guys. So I'm just going to get a pan going. Perfect. Okay, burner's going. So whenever you cook with onions and garlic in a recipe, they generally ask you to cook them at the very beginning. And that's because onions and garlic are super astringent, but once cooked, they become super sweet. And so I always like to cook my onions and garlic very first to get that astringent flavor out before I add everything else. So we're gonna start with the minced garlic and the small diced red onion. Throw those in there. Just stir those around. So it just kind of looks like that. I didn't measure my oil, but you certainly could. Just drizzle it in. Let those stir around in there. If you're on the low FODMAP diet, I know that onions and garlic are not good for you, so you can also skip that part if you want. But if you don't, there's so much flavor in there, so I highly recommend that you do it if you can at all. I think garlic and onions are probably the base of 90% of the dishes that I cook because they add so much flavor. So they don't have...
Oh, Rose, someone was saying that their garlic burns when they put it in first.
Oh, so a lot of it has to do with the temperature of your pan. And so it doesn't need to be on super high heat because you're not trying to caramelize the garlic. You're just trying to cook it through. And if you put it in at the exact same time as your onions, there's so much water in onions that when onions get hot, they release juice and fluid and liquid into your pan. And that actually helps cool the pan down and protect the garlic. And so a big trick is not too high of heat, and also don't walk away. Like I'm standing here and my heat's fairly high because I'm wanting our class to be smooth and go pretty fast. So as long as I don't walk away and I can stir the whole time, then they don't burn. So pay your close attention, keep your heat a little bit lower, add it in with the onions at the same exact time, all that should help. All right, so just in that 1 minute, we've already softened up our red onions and garlic. And so now I'm just gonna get the ground beef in there. We've got pounded ground beef right here. And this is 85-15. I find it's nice and moist, but not too fatty. If people are looking for a leaner beef for health reasons, you definitely could do the 90% beef and 10% fat, but it will end up being a drier finished product. There's a lot of juice in it. So I just kind of crumbled in with my hands and then I'm stirring it around.
And I will take this moment, if you in the audience wanted to turn your video on, that is an option in the bottom left-hand corner. When you move your mouse, you can say start video and we can see you in the kitchen as well. But no stress. We are recording this, but you will not be recorded, just Chef Rose and I. So don't worry about that.
So while this ground beef is cooking, I'm going to talk a little bit about the spices that we're going to add to this because I think it's such a fun part of this dish. And I sort of referenced that in the title of this recipe. I talk about the spices. So in this bowl, I have, I'm not sure if you can see, all the different spices that we're going to use today. And there's things like cinnamon and ground ginger, which probably do not sound super good with ground beef, but I I'm so excited for you to try this because Morocco does this great thing where they combine sweet and savory all the time in a really beautiful way. But I think we actually could learn a lot from them about not being afraid of things that don't traditionally sound like they go together. And so as the beef is cooking, we like to add dry spices to something that's hot and fatty when we're cooking. And the reason for that is that the reason why spices have so much flavor in them is they have this thing called volatile oils. And volatile oils are an oil. And so oil loves other oil to make that flavor blossom and bloom. So when you add a dry spice to oil, the flavor comes out hugely. And so I'm adding it right into the ground beef because there's a lot of juices in here from the olive oil and a little bit of fat from the beef. And so these spices will become way more flavorful than if I just added them in at the end when the whole dish was not hot anymore. And so it's a way to get more flavor out of your dried spices, especially if your dried spices are maybe a little bit on the old side. If you go to Savory Spice Shop in the Old Mill and you ask them how long should I keep my spices, they always say only buy enough you will go through in 1 year. And I can't tell you how many times I've been at someone's house and I was cooking for them and I said, hey, when did you buy these spices? And they're like, when I bought the house 10 years ago. And they have like that set that somebody gave them as like a shower gift or a housewarming present. And it has like the carousel of like all the spices. And the ones that you never use are still there like 10 years later. So if you have that going on at your house, I highly recommend you just open each of them. And if they don't have a scent anymore, I would throw them away. And then just go down to Savory Spice Shop and just buy in small amounts what you're going to use reasonably in a year or less. All right, so now I've got this beautiful, I've got this pot of beautiful ground beef and the scent of cinnamon and cumin and nutmeg and ginger is like coming out all over the place in this kitchen right now. I wish you could smell it too. So cumin and nutmeg are cumin and coriander are two of the spices that are going to show up also over in our Mexican dish. And so they're just used in different ways, but both super flavorful and both unique to their countries with the same spices, which I thought was so cool. So I have this gorgeous ground beef, and I don't have a lot of fat or juices left in my pan, so I'm not going to drain it. But if the beef you use creates a lot of fat and juices, at that point you can just tip your pan to the side, use a spoon to move all the ground beef to one side, and whatever pools on this end, you can use a spoon and just spoon out if you'd like to remove those. So now that I've got this kind of gorgeous spiced beef, now at this point, you can just start adding all the other flavor ingredients. And when I say flavor ingredients, I mean, we're talking a lot of flavor here. I have an entire bowl of chopped parsley. That's a whole bunch that I chopped up really small into this bowl. So I'm going to add all of that. I've also got grated orange zest and orange juice from one big fat orange, and that's going right in. And I've got some mint here, and I saved a little bit because I wanted to show you the technique that I use to chop mint. So the final product we want are these nice kind of fine shreds of mint, and you can achieve that super easily by taking your mint leaves, and I've stacked them up. And I know this is a little bit hard to see, but I plucked all the mint leaves off their stem, and then I stack them up in a stack, just like a whole bunch of sheets of paper on top of one another. And then once they're in a little tiny stack, you can just take your knife and just cut them in really thin little ribbons like this. And then it makes them cut super fast and all at once, where if you just have a pile of kind of big mint leaves, you're like doing lots of chopping and they're all irregularly sized and it feels like it's harder. So just by stacking them up, you get those really fine little shreds, which is so nice. So all of this mint is going into our pot. I also have my cooked brown rice. And I should have mentioned, I already had cooked brown rice. I know in the recipe it says, if you don't already have cooked brown rice, do this right away because brown rice can take a little bit of time to cook. But I also wanted to mention that one of my favorite methods for cooking brown rice especially is I do it what they call the pasta method, where instead of measuring the amount of water you need for your rice, I just get a big pot of water boiling, just like I'm going to make pasta, and I put my rice into it. And because it's such a big pot and it's a rolling boil, the rice cooks way faster. And then I can taste it as it cooks. And as soon as the brown rice is done, I then just strain it just like pasta. And so I find it cooks faster and you are less like is that enough water, or my pan was on too hot and so it ran out of water, but my rice is still crunchy. It just eliminates all of that confusion. And so that's my preferred method of cooking brown rice. So I'm going to stir the brown rice in. Right. And then I still have, so the recipe says almonds, but it also in parentheses says you can use other nuts like pine nuts or pistachios. And I decided to do a combo of pistachios and almonds together, mostly because I realized as I was prepping that I didn't have a full 1/3 cup, I think it is, of the nuts. And so I'm like, oh, I'll just do a combo. And that's one of those things that you just feel confident to trade things out for what you do have instead of feeling like you have to run off to the grocery store every time you might not have exactly the certain nut. Most nuts can totally be interchanged. So I'm going to dump all those in. And I did give the pistachios like a little chop so they're not whole pistachios. And then here in this bowl is my dried fruit. And I decided to do a combination of apricots and raisins. And these are golden raisins just because I think they're a little bit fancier than the traditional black raisins, so they're a little more fun to eat. So I'm going to dump those in too. So this is such a combination of sweet and savory. We've got sweet raisins, sweet apricots, cinnamon, ginger, and then also all of our savory items, all the spices and ground beef and rice. And so it really is just such a mixture of everything together. So now I've got this big, beautiful pot, and I'm just going to stir that all around. And this constitutes our filling.
Hey, Rose, is the rice 1.5 cups like after being cooked
Yes.
rice, or is it dry?
Nope, after it's fully cooked, you're going to want to measure 1.5 cups of cooked rice. Yeah. Rice generally doubles in size, so if you really want to cook only the amount for the recipe, I would cook about 3/4 cup of dry brown rice to get 1.5 cups of finished cooked brown rice.
And we have someone asking about using currants instead of raisins.
Yes, I love currants. They're like even fancier than raisins because they're teeny tiny. I don't know why baby things are so cute to me, but they are. I like baby carrots. I like baby everything. All right. So this is just, I mean, I don't know if you can see the colors, but I've got orange and golden and brown and all those greens from the herbs. Like it's really a pretty hearty, flavorful stuffing mix at this point. And so I bet our peppers are ready. I hear them popping in my oven. I'm going to grab those.
Hey, Rose, do we add the olive oil as an additional ingredient now, or is that for purposes earlier?
It was for drizzling on the peppers.
Okay.
And I used it also to saute the onions and garlic.
Okay.
Earlier as well.
So olive oil is for the peppers and for sauteing onions and garlic.
I'm going to check these and see if they're ready, and they are. So you can tell that they're ready by how soft they kind of feel to the touch. So they shouldn't be so soft that they're kind of collapsing on you because that would make it pretty hard to stuff. And we are going to bake the filling and the peppers together. And so you want them to be a little bit, in culinary world, they say al dente, which means to the tooth, where there's still a little bit of a bite to something. It's traditionally used when they talk about pasta, but we could also use that here. So there's a little bit of firmness still to them, but they've softened quite a bit. So I'm gonna make a spot for them right here. And then I'm just gonna use a spoon. I'm gonna begin stuffing them just as much as will fit in there. And I kind of like it mounded up. I think it looks prettier that way. You can really see all the filling. And if you have leftover filling, say your peppers were not quite as big as mine, the filling just is delicious on its own as a side dish. I've joked around that everything is good in the morning with eggs on it, so you could heat it up and put some fried eggs on top and it'd be a great breakfast. So if the filling is left over, don't throw it out. So I'm just putting kind of 2 big spoonfuls in each one. There we go. And I hope everyone's getting the idea at this point that they definitely can substitute all kinds of things. If you love cilantro, you could change out the parsley for cilantro and do cilantro and mint together. Or if you don't have mint, you could just do even more parsley or different nuts, different dried fruits, different grains. If you don't like brown rice, couscous would be amazing in this, which is a Moroccan grain that they use a lot, so it'd be still very traditional. You could change out the ground beef, as we already discussed. Like, this is a very interchangeable recipe. And the only rule is that your peppers are cooked first, so they're a little bit soft, and that the filling that you're stuffing in is fully cooked when it goes into the oven, because it's not in the oven long enough to continue cooking anything that was in the filling. So as long as your filling is fully cooked before you add it, you can really have a lot of fun with changing things out to make it just how you like it. All right. Add a little more of this guy. Right. So we've got them pretty well stuffed at this point. And I do have a little bit of extra filling, but I think I'm just going to let that be okay. So they're all kind of nicely mounded on top with the filling. And then I'm going to stick these babies back in the oven. I'm going to try not to forget about them while we begin the other recipe. And I should mention, I put them on the middle oven rack, so there's not too extreme heat from below or above. All right.
I bet everyone's kitchen smells so good right now. Is it good?
Are
cinnamon, I can only imagine.
Cooking along with me? I'm curious. Are there people who are cooking along?
There's 2 at least.
Oh, I love it. That's so funny.
Kitchen.
Am I going too fast? Okay. Did you pre-prep all your ingredients like I did? The woman nodding like, this is awesome. That's hilarious. I love it. Okay. So we are going to begin our second dish, just to keep the class going while we're waiting for those peppers to cook. All right. So this is a huge, heavy Dutch oven pan. And this is what I braise in all the time. If you don't have one of these, or if you prefer, you can definitely do a slow cooker. You can do a Instapot for braising. They're all great, and they all have slightly different recipes for how to do it, but you could use all the same flavors and do it in a preferred cooking method for you. I personally like still braising the traditional way, which is in a heavy Dutch oven, because I really like having the control of, I think crock pots, you like set it and leave it for like 8 hours. And then you get to the end and you're like, oh, I hope it's good. So by doing it in a pan like this, and it's a shorter amount of cooking, I get to kind of taste it as it goes. And if I taste the broth while it's braising and I'm like, oh, it needs a little more salt, I can adjust it. Or if the broth seems to be cooking away faster than I like, I can add a little more broth. So I like the control of it, but I definitely see the ease of the other way. And if it's a choice of making it or not making it, definitely do it the easy way. So I'm going to let this pan begin to get warmed up, because we want a nice hot pan to begin our searing of our roast. All right, so I have a pork shoulder roast right here, and I got this from Whole Foods, and I purposely left it just the way I got it out of the paper so that you can see what I do to get it ready to braise. So pork shoulder is also called Boston butt, which is so funny because it's not the butt of the pig, it's the shoulder. But this is the way it comes. And there are strings. They have tied strings around it to keep it really tight together as a roast. And I don't really like that for when I'm braising, because I want the braise to actually get broth and flavor and juices between all of the meat. And so I cut the strings off. And then I also trim some of the fat off the top of it, because in the end, we're going to end up taking the fat out anyway. And there's plenty of marbling throughout the roast, so you don't need this big, huge, they call it a fat cap on the top. And so I prefer to remove some of the fat now while it's cold and easy. And so I just get a sharp knife, and I just move it from one side to the other side, and I just kind of cut a majority of this top fat off. All right. So using my knife, I kind of just cut up over the edge, and then I'm just going to keep going down it. And it doesn't have to be perfect, because you don't want all the fat taken off. You just want a majority of it. So if it comes off, I'm just going to turn around. I try not to cut towards my hand unless it's up out of the way. So I'm going to turn it around and cut away from myself so the knife doesn't slip. The only major accident I've ever had in a kitchen was trimming meat. And yes, there was an ER visit. That's all I'm going to say. So I'm probably a little bit gun shy about that. So I'm just trimming the fat off. There we go. So now I've got this trimmed up roast. It's a piece of the pork shoulder. The reason why pork shoulder is the very best meat for braising is that it does have that marbling in there, which you need fat in order for a braise to really work. If you've ever had braised meat before that felt really dry, they braised a cut that was already super lean, and so it didn't get that same kind of buttery, tender, could eat it with a spoon meat kind of texture. And so at this point, it is totally ready for us to dress. So to dress a roast is when you add all of your seasonings and spices and salt and pepper to it. So I have, all these. I have all these little bowls, and in here is that cumin and coriander that we talked about earlier that's going to show up in both recipes. So I'm just going to start getting these onto my cutting board. So you begin to salt it really well, and I like to spin it as I season it to make sure all sides get it. And then because this was the shoulder blade was cut out right here, and so it's an opening, and so I make sure that I season that cavity as well, even though when I lay it back in the pan, I'm going to close up the cavity and lay it down. But right now I have the chance to add extra flavor to the interior of the meat. Now I'm doing the pepper. Just keep spinning it around. There we go. And then I'm going to do salt, get that finished. I'm going to do the cumin and coriander. And then I begin rubbing it because I really want those spices to stick so I don't lose them. I'm going to do that cavity, both cumin and coriander. So this technique that I'm showing you for the braised pork shoulder, you could do this same exact technique, but you could totally change up the spices and make it a completely different type of pulled pork. So for example, if you want to make pulled pork sandwiches like the American kind of traditional barbecue kind, you could put different seasonings on here. Like you could put chili powder or all seasoning or something like that that wasn't specifically Mexican and still get amazing pulled pork. Or you could do no spices, you could just do salt and pepper so that you would have the option of making that pulled pork dish whatever you wanted afterwards by adding a sauce or something. All right, so all sides are super well rubbed with salt and pepper and all those cumin and the coriander. So at this point I'm ready to sear it. And this is the step that a lot of slow cooker recipes miss, is when you caramelize the meat, when you brown the meat, I'm gonna wash my hands really quick. When you brown the meat ahead of time, it creates this reaction called a Maillard effect. And Maillard is caramelizing of natural sugars. So when we sear the meat to begin with, we are caramelizing the outside of the meat, effectively turning the natural sugars that's in meat into sugar. And which, as we all know, sugar is sweet. And so we're bringing out the natural sweetness of the food. So if you've ever had raw onions, imagine how kind of astringent and harsh that would be compared to caramelized onions that are like sweet and creamy and delicious, and you could eat them just spread on toast. And so that's that reaction of taking the natural sugars in an onion and browning them and turning them into like onion caramel almost. So we're gonna do the same thing with this roast. So I've got oil, I drizzled some olive oil in the pan, and the pan is super hot. So we're gonna hear a noise, hopefully on camera. Can you hear that sizzle? So that sizzle is how hot you wanna make sure your pan is in order to make sure that you're gonna get that really brown crust. So unfortunately you can't see exactly, but I'm gonna tip the pan just a tiny bit so you can see. So there's the roast down there. Oop, it just slid. And I am gonna not move it until that one side is totally browned. And if your meat sticks, it was probably because your pan wasn't quite hot enough, and that's okay. Just leave it there long enough that by the time that caramel crust develops, it'll release the meat from the pan and you'll know it's time to turn it to the next side. So that guy is down in there. And if there are any questions, now's a great time because this takes about a minute per side. So we can chit chat while that's searing.
Sure. Rose, someone asked where you get your knives sharpened.
Do I keep my knives sharpened?
No, where?
Oh, where? Okay,
Mhm.
so I do have a whetstone to do it myself, although as many times as I've tried, it never gets as good as when a professional does it. And I am fully of the belief that you should let the expert be the expert in the room, whatever that is. And so same thing for me goes with knife sharpening. So there is a man, and I'm sure it's not his real name, but his name is Jim Bowie, and he will pick up knives at all the different mailboxes, etc., type businesses around Bend. And so I think it's like $4 or $5 per knife. So I think it's really reasonable. And so every 6 months, I bring all my knives except one, because I need one to cook with while he's got the rest of them. I bring all my knives to a mailbox, etc. And I think the drop off is on a Tuesday, and he has them back by Friday. And he takes them to his house and sharpens them all for me. And then I just pay through mailbox, etc. So it's super simple. And man, I will tell you, when I get down to the point where it's right before they need to go, I am like, they need to go. Like there's a definite difference in my ability to be happy cooking with sharp knives versus dull knives. I think he does a great job. And I even one time printed out instructions because I had a really fancy global knife, which is from Japan. And they hone their edges of their blade differently than we do in America and Japan. And so the website tells you exactly how to sharpen their kind of honed edge. And so I printed it out and gave it to him with the box. And he wrote me a note and said, thanks so much for the instructions. And I was so pleased that he sharpened them the right way, I guess. I was just paranoid that he wouldn't know that this was a different kind of knife. So that was really nice of him to write me a note and assure me that he did it the right way and things like that. So that was awesome. People often don't believe me when I say that you will cut yourself way more often with a dull knife than a sharp knife. And there is a big reason for that. When people cut themselves, it's usually because they're pushing so hard that they actually roll the food they're eating in a way that their hand gets in the way. And so with a sharp knife, you don't have to push really hard. It just kind of gently glides through your food. And so you don't have to push as hard, and that chance of it slipping and cutting you is way less. If you don't know that your knife is super sharp, however, and you go to use it, and people will nick themselves. And so there is a respect you have to have for the sharpness of the knife, but as long as you know it's sharp and you keep your fingers rolled under. And I used to teach knife skills classes, and everyone would practice rolling their knuckles under to make sure that they wouldn't, I call it the crab hand, the kind of claw shape. And then my knife never, ever, I actually touch my knuckles when I'm chopping with a knife, and this flat section of my knuckles kind of becomes a guide, and my knife and my knuckles become almost a precision machine. And so the cut only is as wide as my knuckles are willing to move back. So when I'm mincing, I move it back really slow, and it just slides up and down on that flat surface of my knuckles, but never up above. So people freak out, but I'm like, my blade never goes above my hand. And so as long as it touches just this side, then it will never cut me. And if I'm making bigger cuts, then my knuckles move back in bigger increments. And so that's how I guide what cut I'm doing. I'm pretty sure this side is ready to turn, so I'm going to give it a turn and we'll look at that. Thank you. So I usually use tongs, but I didn't have. All right. So I am going to hold this up so you can see how gorgeous this color is. So do you see how brown and woo? Don't try this at home. So that caramely brown color is what you're looking for. So if you're not there, go ahead and leave it in your pan longer. And I'm going to start it on the next side. So it takes a couple of minutes per side. I'm going to turn the heat up a little bit so it goes a little bit faster on the other side. Here we go. Are there any more questions, Laura?
Not yet. It seems like people are busy cooking. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. I really agreed with you on the everything is better in the morning with an egg on it thing. It's amazing.
I've always joked that, I don't know if any of you watched Portlandia, that show they filmed in Portland. And one of their episodes was put a bird on it, because like everything in Portland has like every pillow has a bird on it, every card. everything was put a bird on it. And so I joked that I was going to make a food cart in Bend that was called Put an Egg on It. And everything was going to have a fried egg on it. And I was going to do like those fancy French salads that come with a fried egg on it. You break the yolk and it becomes part of the dressing. I was going to do, you know, like a morning dish. It was like a, you know, some sort of sauteed veggie herb thing, but you had a fried egg on it. And then like at night, there'd be like, I don't know, some fancy burger with an egg on it. Like everything would have an egg on it. I thought I was very clever, but I also don't really want to work late nights in food cart somewhere in Bend. So, so I think it's more fun to dream about food cart ideas than actually have a food cart when I see how hard they work. And
It's a lot of work. Yeah, food service is a lot of work.
Yeah. Something I'm excited about is so many times when I teach cooking classes, I'm not in my own kitchen. I've taught them for years remotely at all the different libraries during the Novel Idea series. I did a whole program around the book The Help. I don't know if you remember that book. And then I did, what was the other one that was really popular? I can't remember now. What's the book where the guy was from Qatar?
Is that No One Can Pronounce My Name?
Oh, yeah, probably. So I did cooking classes, but so I'm never in my own kitchen. And so I was like, oh, by being in my own kitchen, if I forgot tongs, I can just, you know, make my boyfriend hand them to me because he happens to be right off screen. And so it's just so nice to be in my own kitchen so that if I forgot something and for transporting and setting up. So this has been fun for me to do at my house. So I think the other side is ready. I'm going to flip it again. And I just keep turning it side to side. And when all four sides are done, we'll be ready to continue. Well, these last couple sides are going. I was going to show you. The recipe says to put in smashed garlic. So I have my garlic cloves here that I peeled, and then I was just going to show you. It's not a super fancy trick, but in case you didn't know, to smash my garlic, I just get my garlic cloves, and then I just take the side of my knife, and as hard as I can, I smash it. And you're not going to really eat the aromatics in this braise, so you don't have to chop them up bigger than that. And that smashing it kind of releases all that garlic flavor, and it will go into your broth really beautifully as it cooks. So that's all you have to do with that. And then the other things we're going to add is onions and garlic almost always go together for me. So I chop my onion in kind of medium large dice. Again, you're not going to be eating these, so they don't have to be like little bite-sized pieces. So this is a perfect time to not care what your knife skills look like and just whack up an onion however it comes out works. So a lot of slow cooker recipes, they have you put in the meat, like the chicken legs or the whole chicken or whatever it is, without searing it. And then they also have you throw in the onions and garlic and spices and everything and then put the lid on. And I think there's such a miss in flavor when you do that kind of recipe that if you would slow down a tiny bit, even in slow cooker recipes, and sear the meat, even if it was just in a side pan, and then saute your onions and garlic first and then add everything, I think the final dish would be so much more flavorful. And it's only about 10 more minutes of work on the upfront for a lot of flavor at the end. So if you like slow cooker cooking, I recommend kind of switching that up just a tiny bit. All right, I think we are good. I have to plate that. So I'm going to move that roast back onto the plate that I seasoned it on so that I can use the hot oil that's left in the pan to throw in the onions and just soften them up a tiny bit. And those garlics that we smashed, I'm going to throw those in too. And I kind of the wooden spoon that's in that. You rinse it off. All right, awesome. All right, so I'm just going to stir around those onions and garlic. And I just want to soften them up a tiny bit. And what's happening right now is there wasn't really a lot of fat left in my pan, and those spices have kind of stuck to the bottom. And so there's a technique called deglazing, and I'm going to use my broth that's going to be added to the braise to deglaze the bottom of the pan. And that essentially means I'm going to use liquid to simmer and get all those spices to come up off the bottom so they don't burn. So I just add a little bit, and then using my wooden spoon, I can just rub it along the bottom of the pan and get all those spices to come up. Because I would hate for them to burn, and I would hate to lose them and not have them be in our broth. All right, So the onions don't have to be like fully cooked through. I just want to soften them up and get a majority of that kind of astringent, strong onion flavor out. So that has happened. Turn that off. Move this. And then I'm going to add that roast that we've browned right down into the middle of the pan. Doesn't matter which side. There. There. I'm going to bring this down. And I'm going to add the last few ingredients before we get this guy in the oven. And that's going to be the Mexican oregano. I think it just says oregano, but if you have Mexican, because we're doing Mexican, a dish right here, use Mexican oregano. It's just a slightly different variety that they grow predominantly down in Mexico. And then I've got some fresh thyme sprigs. And I just throw them in whole like this, because again, you're not going to eat the onions and aromatics at the end. And it's just so easy. You just throw them in like that. And then I pour the broth over the top. And if you don't have chicken broth, you can do veggie broth, you could do pork broth or beef broth or mushroom broth or whatever you have. So that's, everything is in there now. So I've got, the roast is in there, and you can't really see this, but I only have about an inch of liquid at the bottom of the pan. So braising is not about totally submerging the meat in liquid. It's just having a lot of liquid in there in order to help the meat, as it's cooking at a very low temperature, kind of cook and steam, and juices are coming out. And that is how a braise is such a unique cooking method. The whole point of cooking with the braising method is that your temperature on your oven is super low. So my oven is only at 250 degrees, or it will be once I take the peppers out. And then I cook it for about 3.5 hours. And that very slow cooking time just literally allows all of the connective tissue and all of the fat that's in that meat to just completely soften and kind of fall apart. This cut of meat, this pork shoulder, if we were to say cut a slice of it and try to like grill it or something, which is a dry cooking method, there's no moisture involved, it would be so tough and hard and unappetizing. But through the beauty of this very simple method, we take kind of what was traditionally not the cuts that anybody wanted. Everybody wanted cuts of meat that were like the really beautiful T-bone steaks or the New York strip steaks, because they had such tender meat when you grilled them. And so these other cuts, they didn't like them for a long time. And so they were super cheap. And so when I taught cooking classes 20 years ago, I'd be like, get the $3 a pound cuts of meat and make it into this incredible moist dish just by this cooking method. Well, over the years, everybody's realized how awesome braising is. And so now those cheap cuts of meat are no longer so cheap. But you really do make a lot of meat that's so tender and delicious in such a quick way. Like it took us about 15 minutes total. And then I'm going to put it in the oven and Netflix and chill for 4 hours. And then I'm going to come back and my dinner's going to be ready. So I am going to move this to the back. You do cover it completely, and covering it traps all the moisture that is going to happen from that broth and the onions and the garlic and then the natural juices that are in the meat. And so you always want to cover it so that you don't accidentally cook all your broth away when you're braising. And so at this point, I would just stick this in my oven just like this. I usually set the timer for 2 hours, and then I turn the whole roast over so that each roast has equal time down in the broth. And then I add another hour and a half and check it. And how you know it's done is you can take a fork and you literally can just start begin to shred the meat on that whole roast that is in the middle of your pan. And then once it's done, I'll show you what I did in a minute. I'll do that. All right, so I'm going to move this to the back. All right. We're going to pause this recipe for just a second because our peppers are ready, and we'll look at those for a second, and then we'll finish the rest of this Mexican dish that we're going to make. All right. So these guys are done, and I don't know if you can see, it's hard for me to tell, but there is like a little caramelized edge around the edge of the peppers, and the topping has browned just a tiny bit. And it's all hot and aromatic, and the peppers are super soft. And so these guys are done. And so the nice thing about this dish is that you could serve them as an entree and eat like 2 or 3 of them as your whole dinner, because really inside of there's vegetables, there's protein, there's grain, there's everything you need for a meal right inside of it. You could also just eat 1 or 2 with a salad, or you could just have 1 as an appetizer. If you were serving like a dinner party of 8 people, you could make 1/2 per person and just have it as an appetizer, which would be really fun. The other thing that's great about this recipe is that it's actually, in my opinion, more delicious the next day when all the flavors have mingled. So it makes amazing leftovers. And when I was testing this recipe to make sure it worked, I actually ate these for lunch on many days at work because I had so many of them around. And so they make great leftovers. And then the last thing that's awesome is that they actually taste really delicious room temperature. And so they would be great to put out, like when you got invited to a potluck somewhere, you could bring these and just set a platter out of them and eat them room temp, and they're delicious that way too. So very versatile and yeah, not super hard. So I'm gonna put these in the back. This guy. All right, so I'm gonna drink some water. Okay, so that braised pork that we were making is to make a dish that Efrain, if you read the book, there's a man named Efrain in the book, and he is the one who witnessed the murder happen. And he, at some point in the book, is talking with his wife and his two children. He's having this conversation with them about whether he should go to the police and report what he saw. But because he was an illegal immigrant, he was super nervous about doing that. He didn't want to get deported. And he was looking at his boys, and that feeling of that like parental care of, even though I know it's the right thing to do, I can't put my family at risk. And in that moment, he makes a comment like, I don't even want to think about this. I just want to eat my tortilla carnitas. And so as I'm reading the book, knowing I'm going to do a cooking class, I take notes about who said what, on what page. And so then I have a real sense of the whole food of the book all on one page of notes. And when I felt that moment, I'm a mom, and how I would feel put in that situation, I thought, how fun. And so I'm going to Google what tortilla carnitas is, because I didn't know. And tortas are these amazing sandwiches, essentially, in Mexico. And there's this incredible bread called talera, which I have heard they sell at Colima Market here. I did not have time to go to Colima, but these are Sparrow Bakery rolls, and they sell these at Whole Foods and also at Sparrow Bakery. And they're just that delicious kind of big white soft rolls with a crusty exterior that Sparrow Bakery makes. And so I decided they would probably be an acceptable substitute to talera rolls, because I know that they're also kind of big and white and kind of doughy on the inside. And so we're going to make our sandwich on a talera roll, our torta. And so we just made that braised pork dish. It's cooking in the oven for 4.5 hours. And then pretending like we just took it out of the oven. And then we have this super moist, tender pulled pork roast in our bottom of our pan. Here's a trick. I love to remove all the fat if possible. And so I love to make the braise in advance so that I can refrigerate it just as I pull it out of the oven. I don't do anything to it. I stick the whole pan in my fridge. And then all the fat raises to the surface and solidifies. And then I can just take a spoon and literally scoop all the fat that kind of came out during the cooking process. I can just scoop it into the trash because it's ice cold and it floats to the top. And then all the really delicious broth and gelatin and good things that are left over from that cooking process are at the bottom. And so it's an easy way to separate out the fat and the protein. And so I spent a little bit of time before the class started. And this is the pulled pork that I got from that roast right here. And so I just spent a little bit of time, and I just sat there and I shredded the pork with my fingers and just made these really beautiful long shreds. So at this moment, this pork is now an amazing finished cooked protein that's so tender and so moist. And I do a lot of things with it. We're going to put it in the torta de carnitas right now, but you could also just have it ready to put into tacos or stuffed in a burrito or sauteed and put over an entree salad or something like that. It also freezes great. So I usually make actually twice as big of a roast at a time. And then I make a huge bowl of pulled pork, and then I freeze it in zipper bags. And then when I want a super quick dinner, I just pull a bag out and it defrosts so quickly because it's not a lot and it's already cooked pork. And then I'm totally like minutes away from a great dinner because that whole portion of the recipe, which is the long time it takes, is already totally done. So I'm a big proponent of cooking at home, but I'm also a big proponent of pre-prepping a lot of different pieces, which is how chefs work in restaurants. They pre-make a lot of pieces, so then they just assemble to order when you place your order for, tacos. Their meat's done, their, salsa's done. And so that's how I love to make cooking doable, even when I work a full-time job, as I do. So it's not about making everything from scratch when you get home at 5:30. It's about planning in advance and having pieces already done for you, and then knowing how to turn it into different things. So one night I have tacos, the next night I have taco salad on a huge bed of greens, and I put a different dressing on it or something like that. And so it feels new to me, even though it's very similarly prepped stuff. Okay, so to make tortilla carnitas, the cool thing is their technique is they actually crisp up the pork again. So it has this really amazing double texture of both moist and creamy and tender, but also crispy on the edges. And if you've ever had carnitas in El Sancho's tacos, there's that like crispiness to them. They do the same thing, except they have like a big sweet, like flat top grill in their kitchen, and they have it going. So I'm gonna let this pan begin to heat up. Move that there, and then I am gonna, while that's heating up, I'm gonna spread some butter. I pre-cut one of these rolls in half, and I'm just gonna spread some butter on them because they also crisp up the bun ahead of time. There, so
I'm getting a lot of comments saying how good everyone's kitchen smells. So
I love it. I'm so pleased that people are cooking along with me. I had no idea they would do that. I love it. All right, so that butter is ready. That there, it's on the side. And then I didn't include a recipe for guacamole or pico de gallo in the recipe I sent you because I figured that most people at this point in their lives probably know how to make guacamole. And if they don't, they could probably Google it and find a recipe that they would like. It's super simple. It's, you know, mashed avocado with, I always do cilantro and lime and a little bit of minced onion and, you know, however you want to do it. I do a little bit of jalapeno too because I like that kind of spicy kick. But you certainly could leave that out if that wasn't your thing. So I'm just going to put a tiny little bit of, I think it says avocado oil in your recipe, but I have olive oil at my hand, so oils can be interchangeable. So I'm going to get that oil in there, and I want to get my oil really hot because I want it to sear, just like when we seared that big roasted pork. I want it to sear and get super crispy and have that texture of like that little crunch of pork inside the sandwich. So I'm going to wait for that to get super hot. All right, I think we're there. So now I'm just going to take some of the shredded pork and all that seasoning that we put on that outside of that roast, that cumin and coriander and salt and pepper and all that flavor is in this pulled pork. So it's so much better than just plain pulled pork because of all those seasonings. So you want to do a single layer, otherwise it won't get crispy. So if you're making this dish like lots of sandwiches, you could either get a much bigger pan or just do it in batches. So initially the pork is going to stick a little bit, and then as it gets that crispy edge, just like the roast, it's going to release from the bottom of the pan. We're just going to leave that there. And then, here's my guacamole that we're going to use in our sandwich, and some bowl of pico de gallo. And I did a mixture of golden tomatoes and red tomatoes just because I like to be fancy. But you definitely can just do red if you would prefer. Right, let me see. Oh yeah. So now that it's crisp on one side, I'm going to give it a stir and make sure that it gets crispy on other sides as well. I'm going to tilt the pan so you guys can get a little bit of a look. Can you see those kind of brown, caramely, crispy bits? That's what you're looking for. And when a lot of the different surface area has that crispy bits, you know that it's ready. So I'm going to give it another little stir. And I think we are there. So now that it's gotten crispy, I'm going to take it out of the pan, and I'm going to use that exact same pan to toast the bun so we don't use too many dishes. I love meals that don't make a lot of dishes. So does my son, who generally has to do the dishes. Now the pork is out, but that pan is still super hot. So I did turn it off. And then I'm just going to put those buttered sides down. and let those get nice and golden and crispy. And you can give a little press down into get the heat of the pan. They make lots of different kind of tortas in Mexico. And I think generally it's just a mixture of some sort of meat, some sort of kind of spicy sauce, guacamole, beans, like the combination can be whatever you want. I've seen really good ones that have kind of a crunchy slaw almost on top of them, where it's got like chopped jicama and carrots and maybe some pickled vegetables, some pickled onions. So you really could mix this up in lots of different ways. All right, so our bun is getting, you see that caramely kind of brown? So our bun is ready. Let me turn that off. And so I'm gonna spread the bottom side with some refried beans that I just have I got out of a can. And I'm gonna spread those on the bottom, and the heat from the bun will warm those up a little bit. All right. And then I'm gonna pile that pork that we crisped up right in the middle of my bun. I'm gonna miss that right there. And then the guacamole, I think, should go on next, personally. So I'm just gonna spoon that guacamole. I'm gonna spread it around so that it's not just mounded up in the middle. There. And then the final thing I'm going to add is that pico de gallo. And you can buy pico de gallo in containers at the store. So if you don't want to make your own, you definitely don't have to. And so I'm just going to pile up some of that pico de gallo right there in the middle. And then I'm going to put the crispy hot bun on top. And then we'll cut it in half and we'll see how that looks.
I think this is the dish that Efrain was disappointed in the book, and I do not think he would be disappointed with this one.
Oh, good. All right, so there is our final sandwich. It's got the pork and the beans and the avocado, guacamole, and the pico de gallo. And my assistants are salivating because they're pretty sure that they're going to be eating these, but they would be wrong because I missed lunch. I will be eating it. So they can come in here and make their own afterwards. So this is the Tortilla Carnitas, made with the pulled pork in the other recipe that we made. I just absolutely love international cooking. I lived in Europe for about 4.5 years in my 20s and had such a blast getting to know culture and people through the food that they make. And countries that are thousands and thousands of years old, I feel like they are just experts at layering flavor and using different cooking techniques and different incredible spices and herbs. And I mean, if you think about fish sauce in Thailand, like how the heck did that happen? Because it is revolting when you smell it in the bottle. But if you've ever had a Thai soup that didn't have the fish sauce, it is flat and terrible. Like you need that fish sauce. And so I feel like other cultures that are so old have this history of trial and error and ingredients and, you know, the spice merchants that moved through thousands of years ago and brought spices, obviously, at some point to both Morocco and Mexico. And I think American food generally sucks because we don't have that history. Our traditional American foods are pretty bland. I mean, mashed potatoes, stuffing, is that American? I think so. Like, I think that give America 1,000 years and being the melting pot that we are and the availability of ingredients, I think our cuisine one day will be as amazing and complex and interesting and rich. But right now, I feel like we're in our infancy of creating a cuisine in America. And so I often am led to cuisines of other cultures for this exact reason. I think that they have just mastered their flavor. And so I was really excited to teach this class because it's a passion of mine to learn about other cultures, and using food as a commonality between people to do that is just such an honor. So I've really loved this class and meeting all of you, and thank you for cooking along with me and making your kitchen smell awesome. I'm very happy to answer questions of any kind. So if you have any, feel free to jump up now and do that. Laurel, do you want to do anything or say
Yeah.
anything?
Yeah, sure. I have quite a few people saying thank you. They enjoyed learning the
Oh,
chef tips and the
good, good.
techniques during the program. And, I think a lot of us are really familiar with tacos and enchiladas, but tortas are not something that you hear about very often. And I'm really glad that we got to learn about it. And I want to thank everyone for taking the time today. It's a beautiful day, and you came out and you cooked, and all these people are saying, can't wait to taste the peppers. It was awesome. Thank you for the cooking. My kitchen smells great. And I really wish the Smellorama vision was a thing. So it's really relatively simple when you break it down into small parts. So thank you for doing that. Did anyone have any questions for Rose as we wrap up here? I hope you all are filling your kitchen so that it's full for the week and you can enjoy the sunshine. Well, thank you, Rose, for putting these 3 recipes together. And for you in the audience, thank you for joining us. If you want more information about a novel idea, you can visit our website at DeschutesLibrary.org/novel idea. And we have a lot of other wonderful programs for the rest of the month that celebrate this book. And they're all free. And this one will be recorded if you want to share it with some friends. It'll be up on our website in a couple of days. But go enjoy the sunshine and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for being here.